questions we ask ourselves so often become the ways that we frame who we are. And as we've heard tonight, there are two questions that the Israelites asked themselves over the ages. Where's this lamb? And who will save us? And these are questions of hope. Abraham believed fully that God would provide. And Israel, when they cried out to a God that they believed would hear them. These aren't questions of people giving up. They're questions from people leaning forward. Questions for people waiting for their moment to arrive. And that's exactly where John 19 takes us. Leaning into these questions, because these questions aren't asking if God will act, but when and how. So tonight, we come to the cross. And at the cross, we find out. Because John's telling of the story of the crucifixion of Christ is very precise. We read John, and it's shorter than some of the other synoptic gospels, and it's not as emotional. And that's not because John didn't feel the emotion. It's not because John wasn't drowning in the atmosphere of what was going on, but it's because John knew this deeper message needed to be told. And he starts it in chapter 19, verse 14, and he says, "It was the day of preparation of the Passover, about the 6th hour." Did you catch that? Did you hear those words? Because John's cutting straight to the core. This moment of preparation of the Passover was the time that the Passover lambs were being brought to the priest to be slaughtered. Right about that 6th hour. So John starts his story and says, hey guys, listen, that lamb that you've been looking for, you're watching all of these other lambs come through the city to go to the priest to be slaughtered for Passover, and the real lamb's right here. He's not being subtle. See, he's making the point that the Lamb of God has arrived. This Passover lamb is being brought to slaughter, and the sacrifice that they've been waiting for is finally here. And then he continues his message. And he says, then Pilate says to the Jews, "Here is your king." And they shouted, "Take him away. Take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asks. "We have no king but Caesar," they replied. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Feel that last one? You see what John's telling us there? This lamb that was promised so long ago, he's repeating his message. We've heard it, right? Jared mentioned it. A son carrying his own sacrificial wood up to a moment to be killed. See, Isaac asked his father, "Where's the lamb?" And Abraham said, "God will provide." And God may have provided a ram in that moment, but here, in this moment, God provides the lamb. And he's doing it in the same place that Isaac asked that question. Because the Temple Mount that they're having this conversation at is built on Mount Moriah. It's built in the same place that Abraham had brought Isaac up to. It's built in the same place that God had provided the ram from. And in this same place, Jesus is being led out. This time, though, when God answers, there's no ram in the thicket. And there's no angel stopping at the sacrifice, because this time, God isn't providing a substitute. God provides himself. But the people needed more than just a lamb. They needed salvation. And with that in mind, John continues in verse 18. There they crucified him with two others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. They crucified him. I think we can become numb to those words. We wear crosses around our necks. We hang them in our homes. They become this sign of hope. And it is. But it's so much more than that. Because it was public. And it was brutal. And when they led a man to be crucified like Jesus, they took him and they gave him a beam of wood. And they tied his hands to it. And they led him through the city so people could ridicule him. And when they brought him to the place that he was to be truly crucified, they laid him on the ground on top of that wood and they nailed his hands. And then mounted the wood on a vertical piece and hoisted him up, leaving all the weight there, until he was finally in place, nailing his feet to the cross to sit there and watch him die. It was brutal and inhumane, so much so that a Roman citizen couldn't be crucified unless they had the permission of the emperor himself to do it. This is the death that Jesus was led to. And being led there as a spectacle and as a statement of power, Pilate puts a plaque above him calling him King of the Jews in 3 languages so nobody misses it. The religious leaders, though, then they push back. So it's like, we didn't call him the king. Say that he just called himself that. And Pilate said, no, what I've written, I've written. Here's the thing. Pilate may have meant it as mockery, but John makes sure he includes it because it's the truth. The sign above the cross isn't irony. It's a proclamation that this is the king. The one true king is bearing the judgment of his people. Because at the cross, God bears the judgment. Judgment. I don't think it's a word we love. Comfortable with grace. Grace is good. Forgiveness. Love forgiveness. Judgment requires a little more. Requires us to acknowledge that something went wrong and that we have to pay a price for things that we do. It's tough. About 4 years ago when we moved into our house, though, Kellen was just getting super angsty. And he's like, can I just take batting practice in the garage? And we're like, okay, on 3 conditions. First one, you move everything out of the way so that you create a safe space for it. 2, you're away from the doors so you don't create any damage. 3, you use collapsible balls so you don't hit and break walls. And he says, bet, got this. 30 minutes. It's like the sound of our house. Some of you know this sound too. It's right? You hear it over and over. It's like music, and all of a sudden it just stopped. And moments later, Kellen walks out, and he is white. And he looks at me and goes, I'm so sorry. And I just looked at him and said, what have you done? And he goes, I think I got tired, and my swing must have gotten long, and my follow-through hit the garage window. And I was like, okay. And he goes, and it's broken. And I was like, okay. I'm like, it's okay, man. Things happen. I know you didn't mean this. I forgive you. I'll take care of it. I walk out there and glass everywhere. And it wasn't just the glass, but this frame around the window had been broken, and the pieces are on the ground. And I'm like, okay, I got this. I can do this. The first thing I do is I go to the store, and I buy glass, and I cut it to fit it right in there, but it won't sit right because the wood framing isn't all there. So then I'm taking these pieces off the ground, and I'm like gluing them in place just enough to make that window hold in. Come to my house today, the window's still there, just like that. One day, eventually, it'll be made new. Not because I replaced a window, but because I replaced an entire door. And when that happens, the memory of walking by it and seeing that brokenness will be gone. See, forgiveness without consequences isn't forgiveness. It's dismissal. Somebody had to take the consequence of the broken window. And just as Jackie shared in the story of Exodus, judgment was coming. And it was coming for everyone. The Israelites weren't exempt from it because they were good people, and the Egyptians, they weren't targeted because they were extremely bad people, but everybody is led to judgment because of sin. Everybody is broken. The only question that they had was what and who would stand between them and judgment. And that's what's happening at the cross. See, God doesn't look at sin and say, I forgive you, and then walk away. Because forgiveness without consequence isn't forgiveness, it's dismissal. He doesn't ignore it, he doesn't dismiss it, because sin has a cost, and that cost is real, and it's death, and it's separation, but God in his faithfulness takes on that cost. And he doesn't hand it back to us, and he doesn't carry it, but he carries it, and he patches it up, and one day he's going to make it all new. And when he does, the burden of sin that we feel won't be there. And that's the difference between the Passover lamb and this moment on the cross. See, the Lamb of Egypt, he answered one question for one night and had to repeat it over and over every year. It was temporary. This moment on the cross is once, and it's permanent. The question of who will save us is being answered not by what we do, because we can't. We don't have that ability. As much as we try, we don't have the ability to save ourselves. It's being answered by what he carries to the cross. And that's all the burden of sin. As John continues, he shows us this element of Jesus that could easily be overlooked, but I think it's important. It's important for us to recognize that this is what created the ability of Jesus to fulfill the role of the Passover lamb. Because standing there at the cross of Jesus is his mother. And in the middle of everything, in the middle of the pain, in the middle of all this weight that he's carrying, Jesus looks down and sees her. He sees her, and he makes sure he takes care of her. And he entrusts her to his beloved disciple. John records that he says, "Woman, your son." Handing her off. And then to the disciple, "This is your mother." Jesus is dying, and he's making sure his mother is not going to be alone. This isn't a throwaway line. That's John showing us that the man on the cross is fully human. He loves the way we love. He gives the way we give. He grieves the way we grieve. He feels the weight of relationships and loss the same way we do. And that matters because if Jesus is only God, if he's not actually one of us, then he can't stand in our place. He's not connected to our humanity. He hasn't faced what we face, and he can't represent us. But on the other end of that coin is if he's only human, then he's born just like we are, weak and broken with a sin nature, already a victim of the very thing he came to defeat. And he couldn't have finished the work. So it had to be both, fully human and fully God at the same time. And that's the only thing that was going to make the cross work. And we see John merge these two natures again in verse 28. Knowing that everything was now complete, Jesus cries out, "I'm thirsty." A human response with deeper undertones. And a soldier takes a sponge and he soaks it in wine vinegar and he puts it on a branch of hyssop and he lifts it to his lips. Hyssop. The same branch that the Israelites used during the first Passover to paint their doorposts. The hyssop that they dipped in the blood and wiped on the frame to protect themselves. This same hyssop is used to raise one last cup to Jesus' lips. The same plant that applied the blood of a temporary sacrifice is now present at the moment that sacrifice is complete. And then in verse 30, we see that when he had received the drink, Jesus says, "It is finished." This is not a give-up line. It's not like I'm done. It's not, "It is finished." Because Jesus wasn't taken to the cross. He went there on his own. Sit on that for a moment. Jesus wasn't taken to the cross. He went there on his own. Not led without choice, but in full understanding of what needed to be done and what was going to be done, even if he didn't deserve it. And remember that ram on Mount Moriah that Jared talked about? Some rabbis and theologians come to understand and suggest that maybe that ram was more than just a replacement. Maybe in that moment, God was showing the people who would eventually come. Not a small lamb who couldn't do it, who was forced into this, but a mature man who knew what he was doing and was fully capable of making his own decisions and freely, on his own power, walked up to do it. This wasn't a man giving up. It wasn't a gasp. In fact, Mark's account of these very moments, what Mark says is that with a loud cry, Jesus let out his last breath. In Greek, it's one word, tetelestai. And this word was used when a mission was complete or when a debt is wiped clean. Jesus, in his final breath, makes a declaration that the work is done, that the work is finished, that there's nothing left to owe. Because at the cross, God finishes the work. And in this moment, every question the Jewish people were asking was answered permanently. Where's the lamb? He's here. He's here, lifted up on a cross just as God promised. Who will save us? Him. Not Moses, not Aaron or Miriam, not you, but him. Once, finally, completely. See, God provided the lamb, and God bore the judgment. God finished the work, and then he bowed his head, and he gave up his Spirit, not taken from him, but given freely. We love forgiveness. We love grace. And we love Sunday morning. And the celebration, the risen Savior, the hope. But this, right here, is heavy. And it should feel that way. Because this is what it cost. This is what love looks like when it goes all the way. This is why we call it Good Friday, not because it's easy, but because God was faithful to his promise to provide and to save. For some of us, we've walked through this story for decades. We remember the pieces. And tonight, my hope is that it hits a little different. Tonight, my hope is that it hits the way something does when grace becomes real again. But there's some of us here tonight, maybe the story's different. Maybe you're hearing this for the first time. Maybe you're understanding it for the first time. Maybe you're here because somebody brought you and you came out of obligation. Maybe you're here because you're curious. Maybe you're here because this is just what you do on Easter weekend. And if that's you, I want to tell you something. This moment at the cross is for you. See, Jesus didn't go up there on the cross just for everybody who grew up in church, just for everybody who knew all the answers. And Jesus didn't go up on the cross for everybody who's cleaned themselves up to look good on a Sunday morning. He did it for everybody. No amount of good effort, no amount of religious knowledge is going to make it easier. No amount of that will ever save you. Only he can. See, the questions the Israelites have been asking are so often the questions we ask ourselves, like, who's going to save us? It's him. It's not you. Let him do it. But know this, he's not standing on the cross saying, hey, once you get it together, come see me. He's standing at the cross saying, come see me. If you need a little cleanup, we'll do it together. And if tonight's the night that you want to begin that relationship, it's not hard. There's no special rituals, no perfect prayer. It's just a moment. Simply a moment of recognition and release. And if that's you tonight, I'd love to hear your story. Members of our staff would love to hear your story. Because that's what this is about. That's what this cross was. But for all of us, no matter where we're at in this journey, the invitation is to sit here in this moment at the cross. To not move too quickly to Sunday. I get it. Sunday is good. Sunday is fun, and it's bright, and we need Sunday. But without Friday, Sunday loses something. Because sin had to be dealt with before death could be defeated. And it's worth sitting here for this moment. So tonight, here's what I invite you to do. And for each of us, it's going to look different. But sit at the cross until Sunday. For some of us, that's going to look like fasting. To give up your meals tomorrow, just like so many of our church fathers did. And sitting in those hunger pains, remembering the path that the Lamb took to get there. For others of us, it's prayer. Not with a long list, not with an agenda, but to sit and pray. To thank God for what he's done. But for all of us, what this should mean is a time of rest. There's nothing left for you to do. The work's finished. I mean, it's done. And we get to start this celebration. We get to start this evening sitting at the cross together in the act of communion. Because this table brings us back to the cross. The bread reminds us of the lamb who was given. And the cup reminds us of the blood that was poured out. And just like the Passover, this table doesn't leave us waiting, but it's been fulfilled. So we don't come adding anything. We don't come because it's finished, but we come to receive what's already been accomplished. To sit at the cross together at this time.